Welcome to Hot Topic Bold Talk. My name is Dr. Jackalyn Rainosek. I'm with DTP-Leadership Group. But this podcast is a place where we examine the most challenging issues of our times, where we encourage reflection rather than reaction. Can't do anything with reaction, but we certainly can reflect back on what's happening and then determine what action we want to take. The United States, once again, is in a moment in history when decisions made by political leaders will shape the future of the nation for decades. At the center of this moment is President Donald Trump's expanding his military campaign abroad and his increasingly aggressive consolidation of power at home. So that's what I'm going to be looking at, is expanding military campaign abroad and yet increasing aggressively consolidation of power at home. We cannot ignore what's happening anymore because recent developments suggest that these two forces, overseas and political power domestically, may be deeply connected. The Trump administration has widened military operations in multiple regions, particularly through its accelerating conflict with Iran. At the same time, the administration has pursued controversial domestic policies involving immigration enforcement, voting laws, redistricting, and attacks on legal institutions. Many observers believe that the combination of these two developments signals a dangerous shift in American governments. Wars can strengthen presidential authority, often allowing leaders to claim emergency powers that bypass traditional domestic and democratic check and balances. For critics of Trump's administration, the current moment raises a fundamental question. Are the wars abroad part of the broader strategy to consolidate power at home? And I believe that's what's happening. But to answer that question, we must examine the conflicts overseas, the political battles within the United States, and the warnings from experts who fear that the American democracy itself may be entering a period of extraordinary risk. The United States enters another war. The most dramatic development in recent weeks has been the expanding war between the United States and Iran. Now, the Trump administration has launched a joint military campaign with Israel, targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, military infrastructures, and leadership positions within the regime. According to the reports summarized in the Time magazine, the operation killed Iranian's supreme leader and targeted retaliation attacks throughout the Middle East. So Iran's not giving up, they're retaliating. Sadly, Iran responded quickly with missiles and drones which struck American military installations and domestic and diplomatic facilities across the Persian Gulf region. Among the most tragic instances was a drone that struck a U.S. operations center in Kuwait that killed multiple American soldiers. The Pentagon later identified several of the fallen service members, including Major Jeffrey R. O'Brien of Iowa, along with other soldiers whose lives were lost during the attack. At the same time, civilian casualties inside Iran have been mounting rapidly. Iranian officials report that hundreds of civilians have died and thousands have been wounded as a result of the bombing campaign. These deaths underscore a harsh reality. War is never simply a political maneuver. It carries enormous human costs for soldiers and citizens alike. Yet the circumstances surrounding the beginning of this conflict have raised serious questions about how and what is the reason this was ever initiated. One of the most controversial aspects of the current war is that it began without congressional authorization. The United States Constitution assigns the power to declare war to Congress, while the President serves as a commander-in-chief of the military. This separates power and was designed intentionally by the founders of the United States to prevent any single individual from taking the nation into war without public accountability. Yet that is exactly what is happening. However, the Trump administration launched its military campaign against Iran without asking Congress to approve it. Political analysts and former congressional staff members have warned that the decision represents a profound constitutional problem. As one former aide explains that worked in Congress, a planned military campaign targeting a sovereign nation's leadership and infrastructures clearly defines and meets the definition of war. Yet Congress was largely bypassed in the decision-making process. Members of Congress from both parties acknowledged that they received little information before the strikes began. Reports indicated that the Congressional Leadership Group, known as the Gang of Eight, was notified only shortly before the military operation was launched. This developed, and the development itself and the way it was developed, reflects a broader trend in American politics. For decades, I know that presidents from both political parties have expanded executive authority in matters of war. The 2001 authorization for the use of military force, originally intended to combat those responsible for the September 11th attack, have been stretched repeatedly to justify military operations around the world. But critics argue that the Trump administration has gone even further by initiating large-scale military actions without meaningful consultation with Congress. The conflict with Iran is not a limited defensive strike. It is a sustained campaign targeting the leadership of another nation. For many constitutional scholars, the distinction matters deeply. The war with Iran is only one part of the broader pattern of military intervention during Trump's second term presidency. Since returning to office in 2025, President Trump has ordered or authorized military operations in multiple regions. These include airstrikes against Islamic State, targeting Somalia, operations in Iraq and Syria, naval strikes against the rebels in Yemen, and military operations across Latin America. One particularly controversial episode we all know about, when the U.S. Special Operations raided Venezuela, which resulted in the capture of their president, Maduro, and his transfer to the United States for prosecution on charges related to narcotic trafficking. Additional operations have targeted suspected drug-struggling vessels in the Caribbean Seas and Eastern Pacific Ocean, yet it's never been proven exactly what they were doing. Each of these operations have been justified individually as necessary for national security, but taken together, they paint a picture of a presidency increasing willingly to rely on military force as a primary tool of foreign policy. Some analysts see echoes of earlier eras in which the United States intervened repeatedly around the world in pursuit of geopolitical goals. Others worry that the accumulation of these conflicts risks drawing the United States into overlapping wars with unpredictable consequences. Scholars of international relations caution that military destruction alone rarely produces political stability. As noted by experts writing in the conversation, bombing campaigns in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya succeeded militarily, but they failed to create lasting political order. Let me say that again. As noted by experts writing in the conversation, bombing campaigns in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya succeeded militarily, but failed to create lasting political order. Indeed, these conflicts often produce power vacuums, insurrections, and long-term instability. The question facing policymakers today is whether the conflict with Iran could follow a similar trajectory. Another striking aspect of the Iran conflict is President Trump's own explanation for ordering this attack. In an interview with ABC News, Trump acknowledged that threats against his life played a role in his decision to launch the military operation. I got him before he got me, Trump said, referring to Iran's supreme leader. The statements reflected the president's belief that Iranian operatives had been involved in assassination plots against him during the 2024 election campaign. While U.S. intelligence officials had warned Trump about possible threats from Iran, investigators never established a confirmed link between the Iranian government and the actual assassination attempts that occurred during the campaign. Trump's comments have therefore raised questions about whether this is a personal motivation, which then decided for him to initiate a war with Iran. Historically, presidents have justified military actions primarily based on national security interests. Personal grievances, while sometimes present behind the scenes, rarely appear so openly in public explanations for military conflict. For the critics of the administration, Trump's remarks blur the lines between national policy and personal vendetta. And we know he has many personal vendettas. He has taken it on lots of people in America. So he's now doing it internationally. The timing of the conflict has also fueled speculation that the war may serve as a distraction from domestic political controversies. One of the most significant issues confronting the administration involves renewed scrutiny of Jeffrey Epstein's cases. Recently, the House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi to testify about the Justice Department's handling of the investigative materials related to Epstein. The vote was noticeable because several Republican lawmakers joined Democrats in supporting the subpoena, signaling growing frustration within the Congress. Investigators are examining whether the Justice Department improperly withheld documents when it released millions of pages of Epstein's related records early in the year. At the same time, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has faced scrutiny over newly revealed communications with Epstein that continued years after Epstein was convicted. For critics of the administration, the outbreak of war has shifted public attention away from these controversies. Political history offers many examples of leaders using foreign conflicts to rally national unity or redirect public debate. Because there is plenty of public debate about what Trump is doing, and his polls have dropped significantly. Whether that dynamics at work today remains to be an open question, but we must continue to look at what he's doing in our country as he tries to shift the focus to foreign policy. And I want to say, regardless of the political motivation, the consequences of war are measured in human lives. The drone strike that killed American soldiers in Kuwait illustrates the dangers faced by military personnel who are deployed overseas. During a Pentagon briefing following the attack, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sparked controversy by describing the deaths of American soldiers with the phrase, "tragic things happen." I personally think he's totally out of touch with any kind of empathy for anything. But the remark stunned reporters in the room. Military leaders have traditionally approached casualty announcements with solemn respect for the sacrifices made by service members and their families. Former defense secretaries and generals have often spoken publicly about the emotional burden of reading the biographies of the fallen soldiers. It sounds like Hegseth has not bothered to read the stories of the individuals that have died. In contrast, critics argued that Hegseth's comments appeared dismissive of human cost of war. General Dan Chain, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, offered a more traditional response by expressing condolences and gratitude to the families of the fallen. General Dan Kane, again, I want to name that since I mispronounced it first, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, offered a more detailed and traditional response by expressing condolences and gratitude to the families of the fallen. The contrast between the two responses became symbolic of broader concerns about how the war is being managed. Now, the conflict has also exposed tensions between the United States and several of its traditional allies. Spain has refused to support the military campaign against Iran and denied U.S. forces access to its military bases. Spanish Premier Pedro Sanchez declared that his government position could be summarized in 3 words: no to war. Sanchez warned that Europe must not repeat the mistakes of the Iraq War, which he argued disables the Middle East and created long-lasting insecurity across the region. President Trump responded by threatening economic retaliation against Spain, including cutting off trade with the countries. European leaders were quick to rally behind Spain, emphasizing that the trade policy is determined collectively by the European Union. So they're saying to Trump, you can't play these games anymore because we have a European Union and we will take care of Spain. The dispute highlights the potential consequences of unilateral military action, which is what Trump is doing. Historically, American foreign policy has relied heavily on international alliances, When alliances feel excluded from major decisions or pressured to support conflicts they oppose, those alliances can weaken. While most of the public's attention focuses on the war abroad, major political battles are unfolding with the United States itself. One of the most controversial developments is something I've gone over and over again, the redistricting that Trump is demanding from certain states, and voting laws that critics argue could reshape the nation's political landscape. The Supreme Court recently blocked a lower court ruling that had ordered a new congressional map in New York after finding that the existing map discriminated against minority voters. That's the second one that has happened. We got it in Texas, now we've got it in New York. Allowing the contested map to remain in place could strengthen Republican control of the Congress in the upcoming elections. At the same time, they are so scared that they then passed the SAFE Act, at least in the House. Hopefully the Senate has more sanity about it, because the SAFE Act would prevent many Americans from voting since they don't have the documentary proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. That means they have to have a passport or their original birth certificate. That is going to be extremely hard. Critics warn that millions of citizens lack the necessary documentation, as I've said, and they face significant barriers to voting. That is unacceptable in a democratic nation. These developments have raised fears that the Democratic participation may be restricted at the very moment when wartime powers are expanding the authority of the executive branch. And if you don't think that Trump has thought of this, you are sadly mistaken. And we have immigration and human rights that we're fighting over here. He's spending time trying to help people free themselves from authoritarian governments, and yet he's an authoritarian in his own country. Another area of controversy involves immigration enforcement policy. I've already mentioned the large detention facility at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, known as Camp East, Montana, has faced intense scrutiny after reports of deaths and poor living conditions. According to reporting by the Washington Post, 3 detainees died at the facility within a short period of time, including one death ruled as homicide by the county medical examiner. Inspectors documented numerous violations of federal detention standards, including inadequate medical care and reports of physical abuse. Some detainees reported being beaten by guards or denied medical treatment. The facility has since come under review by federal authorities, and officials are considering whether it should be closed. For critics of the administration's immigration policy, the controversy reflects much broader concerns about human rights and the accountability of the individuals making these decisions. There is one thing we can do as citizens. We can hold those making these decisions responsible for what they're doing. I think one of the most profound concerns I have is what political analysts are saying about wartime power could affect domestic freedom. Historically, when war expands into presidential authority and expands presidential authority during times of conflict, then presidents often invoke emergency powers that allow them to bypass normal legislative process. He's tried this several times already, even when we weren't in war. These powers may involve surveillance authority, restrictions on civil liberties, or the redirections of federal funds. Political commentators David Fromm and Tom Nichols have warned that the current war with Iran could grant the Trump administration unprecedented leverage. They argued that a wartime president can claim that criticism undermines national security and use that argument to attack journalists, political opponents, or even elections themselves. Because we're hearing this thread of Trump wants to control elections nationally, which would mean he could establish all the guidelines for it. Trump has already invoked emergency power in controversial ways during his presidency. We're seeing it continually. Now, with the country engaged in a major war, these powers could expand further. At the center of these debates lies a fundamental constitutional issue. Again, the founders of the United States designed a system in which power could be divided among three branches of government. Congress would declare war, the president would command the military, and the courts would interpret the law. Congress was given the right to declare war because supposedly the Congress is representative of the United States citizens. This structure was intended to prevent the consolidation of power in one single person, Trump. But over time, presidents have increasingly asserted the authority to wage war without congressional approval. He's not the only one. But if Congress continues to relinquish its role, the balance envisioned by the Constitution may erode. The true result could be a presidency with vast authority over both foreign and domestic policy. Again, I'm talking about that the result could be a presidency with vast authority over both foreign and domestic policy. I do not think this is what this nation wants. Its citizens do not want it. And I think the United States now faces a moment of profound uncertainty. The nation is engaged in a widening war overseas while simultaneously confronting intense political struggles at home. Military conflicts, constitutional questions, and domestic and political battles are all intersecting at once. Whether these developments represent a temporary crisis or a lasting transformation of American governance will depend on how the Congress, the courts, and the public respond. One fact, however, is certain. The decisions made today will shape not only the future of American foreign policy, but also the strength of the nation's democratic institutions. So I want to say to you, thank you for joining me on Hot Topic Bold Talk. As always, my goal is not simply to respond to the news, but to encourage thoughtful reflection about the issues shaping our democracy and our world. Until next time, remember that democracy depends on informed citizens. That is the reason I started these podcasts. I want to have informed citizens who are willing to think deeply, ask questions, and hold leaders accountable. And here on Hot Topic Bold Talk, I always want you to be encouraged to take the information I'm providing and any of the news things that you pay attention to and have reflection about what's happening, and then not react, but have reflection, ask the questions, think about them deeply, and then figure out how you think we need to hold leaders accountable. If you find my podcast helpful to you and educational, I'm asking you to take time and support me in Patreon with only $5 a month. That can be a supportive thing to contribute to what I'm making an effort to do each week to build an educational process that takes every aspect of an event Now you'll say she's mentioned Trump several times, but I've also admitted that there are many presidents that have tried to do the same thing, just not at the level that Trump is doing. And we've seen it dramatically in our domestic affairs, and now we're seeing it on the national stage. So I want to thank you for listening to me, and I appreciate you listening, and I hope you will share any thoughts you have about how I contribute to building things that hopefully will help you decide what you think is most important for us to do. Thank you. And I hope you have an opportunity to truly think about what has been said.